Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Open Mic, Writers in Their Own Words, the show where every episode I talk to writers uh, from around the spectrum, but mostly mystery, crime fiction, and thriller authors. I love to learn what it is they do and hopefully how their experiences can help you on your own writing journey. Before I introduce my guest today, please take a moment and hit the subscribe button so you never miss a future episode. If you like what you hear today, please tell a friend, because that is really the best way for endeavors like this one to gain an audience. A good referral is always something we appreciate here. A nice review is also great. 5 stars if you would be so kind. It does help other people find the show. So all of those things are great. End of commercial. I'll just say thank you in advance if you do any of those things. My guest today is a best-selling writer who has gone from designing roads on the thrill-a-minute California highway system to the even more fast-paced and some might say equally treacherous world of thrillers. His work has won numerous awards across which he maybe will tell us a little bit about. And I'm really happy to have him on the show today. So please welcome Luke Bennecke to the Open Mic. Luke, how are you doing?
Good. Greetings, everybody. Hey, Rich. Good to see you again. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Well, let's start off with something really basic here. For those who might not be familiar with your work, give me a little bit of the elevator pitch of to describe your books because it's interesting to me. You do have some that are series or multiple books, but you also have some really interesting standalones. So give me a little bit of the 411 of how you consider your writing.
Sure. My fans have called me the layman's Tom Clancy. So if you like Tom Clancy kind of thriller, tech thriller type stories, fast paced, tightly written, these are some books that you might enjoy. I started out about 10 years ago writing. I thought, everybody's got one book in them, right? So this is my chance. I had a couple months off from work, and I thought, hey, let's write a book. How hard can it be?
Hmm.
And famous last words, of course. Really enjoyed the process, and I thought, you write a book and then you edit it for spelling and grammar, and you're all done. And of course, that's not at all what it's really like. But I enjoyed the process so much. I wrote a follow-up to that book, and then had a couple, like you said, a couple of standalones out there just to kind of explore my creativity and they have different. They've received different levels of awards and likes on Amazon and those types of places. So it's been a fun journey so far, and I'm looking forward to, whatever comes out next.
What would you say? What have you learned, I guess, is the shortest way I can ask this question because I think your first book came out around 2018, 2017, somewhere in that time frame.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah.
what this industry changes, it feels like sometimes daily.
Yeah.
What have you learned, you think, in that time that's been the most important thing for you?
To stick with it and to try to ignore the naysayers, the people that tell you don't know what you're doing or why'd you write it like that, or you have a typo on page 12, your whole book sucks or whatever. Keep sticking with it. They say that writers get their voice anywhere from 500,000 to a million words written and edited, and I'm in that sweet spot right now. So I've recently found my voice, and if you've written one book, congratulations, that's good. You're on your journey, but you still have a couple more books to go before you actually kind of find your voice. And what is a voice? It's a compilation of everything you've ever read, plus everything you've ever experienced, plus everything you've ever written. And every single one of us is unique in that regard, right? So when you find your voice, that's where you're truly telling a story, and that's where I think the synergy comes from when you start syncing up with your readers, and they start reading it instead of saying, this sounds a little mechanical, or you have a plot hole here, or whatever. You get to the point where if it's done right and it's edited and everything, people are really read it and they pick it up and they don't really want to put it down. that's the good stuff. That's entertaining, and that's what we're here to do is to entertain. Give me 6, 7, 8 hours of your time, and promise to entertain you. So
That's a really uh, interesting and I think really accurate description of voice because and I think every writer struggles for that. And I think you really nail it too when you talk about how much time it takes to,
yeah,
we've all heard now, 10,000 hours to become an expert at something or
right.
what have you and blah, blah. But I think with writers, um, it does take a while to
It
find
does.
the thing that is you because all of us start writing as readers the
Yes.
time we're little kids, we read, I'm sure you were, I still am, of course, a voracious reader. Most writers are.
Yeah.
And it is impossible to, I think, to not, when you start writing, to consciously or subconsciously, you're trying to emulate the things that you've read that you really like. And it takes a while to kind of weed through all that and find the thing
Hmm.
that's you.
Yes.
How long do you feel it took you to find your particular voice?
I think I started kind of landing once I finished my third book, which was Echo from a Bayou. So I was in the 300. Each book's about 100,000 words, so it's 300. I started. Okay, doesn't sound like anything else I've read, is what the feedback I was getting, and then I started writing the fifth book, which is the third book in the Jake Bendel series. Just by the way, as a side note, published date coming out October 6th. We just figured that out. So that book there, it's kind of, oh, okay, all the different pieces for craft are in there. They're locked and they're loaded. And so when I start writing, it's there and it's how I write. And I've got a little thought here and there in italics that I put, and I do these types of dialogue tags, and these are the length of my paragraphs, and this is how I envision people, talking back and forth, and I try to have conflict in there. Hundreds of different things that go into the craft of writing to make it entertaining to me. That's kind of when I started going, oh, okay, it's like Baldacci, it's like this author, it's like Patterson in these respects, but it's uniquely mine. So I would say between the third and fourth book, and now that I've written seven full novels, several of them are still in the pipeline with my agent. Um, I feel a lot more comfortable with sitting down and creating something out of nothing, which is the hardest, ironically, the hardest part of being an author. But for me, it's to me simultaneously the most fun because you're like, what's going to happen? I don't know. I literally don't know what's going to happen next. But we're just kind of channeling from wherever ideas come from, and it ends up most of the ideas end up making it onto the page, and that's super fun.
Well, it's interesting you say that too, because, you know, thrillers by nature tend to be very plot driven,
Mhm.
a lot of the thriller writers that I've talked to over the years are extensive detailers, they're plotters, they outline everything,
Yeah.
etc. Sounds like you don't do that. Am I reading that right?
Well, I'm an engineer, so would you go to me if you're going to go build a house? Would you say, let's just start grading and we'll figure out where we're going to put the house later, and then let's start building the foundation and figure out if it's going to be one story or two story while we're digging the foundation. Foundations are totally different if it's a one story versus a two story, or if you're your wall thickness. I was a three bedroom or four bedroom or five bedroom. What are we building? I don't know. We'll figure it out when we get there. That doesn't work for me. I'd like to have a set of blueprints to know what we're building structurally. Make sure that when the wind comes, it's not going to fall down, or when the earthquake comes, it's not going to fall down. But the aesthetics, interior, what kind of flooring you're going to put on, what kind of faucets or sinks or colors of the walls or how you're going to decorate it. You can do all that after you have the structure. So you don't need to do that all at the beginning. So what I do is I have an idea. I have eight different sub acts, 3 acts broken into 8 different sub acts. And then I start creating an outline structurally for the overall plot. And when we introduce these characters, and so I have with keeping in mind we need a character arc in there and for everybody. And then that's when I pants all that. I pants my outline. I pants the original rough outline of the overall story, giving myself the flexibility to change it if I need to. And then I put an outline together that's generally been 5 to 10 pages of text. And that's where I throw in more ideas. I pants all that. And then when I have that, I put all that into Scrivener and I shoot for like 80 chapters. And then I start and I put all that in. And then I've traditionally given myself the flexibility to say, okay, for each chapter, this is the purpose, this is the primary motion, this is the POV character, this is the goal, these are the clues, all that stuff. And then I pants the chapter knowing, what needs to happen, what we need to have in all the ingredients. So I pants each chapter as I go. But structurally, I know I'm good because if I'm on chapter 45, I don't need to go, well, he's going to go here and this and that, and I need to make sure this arc is maintaining or whatever. I already know that in the big picture, it's going to fit. So I just need to make sure that I meet these goals or whatever, and then I can do that. And then, of course, when you're done, you can smooth out and clean up. But I'm a hybrid pantser outliner when it comes to writing books.
Yeah, it's really interesting. That really sounds a lot to me like cooking. I love to cook, right? I'm the
Right.
cook in
Yeah.
our family, and so I
Yes.
have tried. And I happen to be married to a civil engineer. So I've tried to teach my wife to cook, I don't know how many times, and it is just beyond stressful for her. She wants A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D. I don't want any freelancing of anything. She's a fabulous baker because
Okay.
it has to be very precise on ingredients and everything. And so I've tried to teach her to cook, and she's just finally waved the white flag and just said, "No, if you're traveling or something, I'll make a box of macaroni and cheese. I'm good."
Yeah.
Or
Perfect.
whatever. But I'm a little more like you. I have, I like to do an outline, but I like pretty much everything you describe. I like to understand what the arc is so I don't lose the plot, so to speak, going
Sure. Sure.
forward and have my guy going off and doing all kinds of things that now he's written
Right.
into a corner.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you want the flexibility to flesh a guy out a little bit, give that
Yeah.
character some substance or style that, as that little bit of flavor that makes them less wooden
Yeah.
and all that. When you're just trying to get it all out of your system before you start editing and adding all that stuff, you
Correct.
still don't want to be out there with your ass hanging in the wind on something now you can't go anywhere with it.
Yeah. Nobody wants to read something that's just plot. It's
Right.
really it's boring. It's like this happened and this happened and this happened. Okay, why do I care? Why would I invest in this? I have to be connected to the character. I mean, you at least have to ground your reader in the main character at a minimum. So you have to sprinkle in those details. And at the end of the day, we're emotional creatures. Logically, we like the plot, but the best stories have both. And some of them maybe have a little more character driven than plot. I just read a Dean Koontz book from the 80s. I forget what it was called, but it had tons of stuff. It was like 80%. The plot was pretty simple. It was like 80% character descriptions and their background and all this stuff. And so, but there was lots of characters, like a couple dozen characters. That was his style. That was his voice, was really going deep into the end. He's been a very successful author over many decades. So, there's pros and cons there, but I like a balance. To me, everything in life seems to need kind of a balance. You don't want to be on one extreme or the other, whether it's plot, character, or anything else in life.
Right. You mentioned your book Echo from a bi, Bayou. Listen to me talk. Um, that book has a supernatural component to it in that your protagonist is being driven by memories of a past life.
Yeah.
What inspired you to take a supernatural twist with that particular story? And how is that something you'd always wanted to do? And what was the driver behind that?
That's a great question. There's a scene in the book where the protagonist is with his therapist and they're talking about past lives as a theory to, what we're all doing here. And that scene is based on something that actually happened to me. I was in my therapist's chair talking about whatever, and that came up, and I was like, I hadn't even, I literally said, like, are you nuts? Like Shirley MacLaine? I mean, what? That's not how it works. That's not how all the religions in the world work. And she didn't smile. She's like, I'm dead serious. That's how I believe things work. And I'm like, okay. And she's like, I encourage you to go read these books. There's some weird stuff out there that was happening with kids who are 3, 4, and 5. They're waking up with night terrors. They have memories of things and descriptions of airplanes and things that 4-year-olds should not have any memories of, and gruesome, violent, whatever, and not just nightmares, but like night terrors. And it was kind of inexplicable. And there was a scientist who went around and he studied all these kids, and kids are like learning other languages and they knew things that they shouldn't know. And so I thought that was a fascinating phenomenon. Obviously, I don't have all the answers, but reincarnation kind of fits the bill there as far as one possible reason these kids are having these kind of traumatic experiences. And so I thought it would be interesting to take that to the next level. What if you are out skiing, you hit your head, and you all those memories are in our brains, but they're locked, and he hits his head and it unlocks an entire lifetime of past memories. And then you remember getting shot and killed by your best friend when you were this close to finding a treasure and you had the love of your life in there. So there's a romantic aspect, and you remember things about being married to this wonderful woman, and you wonder, is she still around? And you look it up, and he goes and he looks up, she's still alive. She's older now, but she's still here. And so I thought it'd be fun to take that character on that journey to find answers, and I pantsed a lot of it, and it was a lot of fun to read or write, and I think a lot of people have had a good time reading that book. It's definitely different. It's different genres. It's thriller, it's suspense, it's romance, a little bit of supernatural, like you mentioned. So
Well, and it's interesting because most of the time, our agents will tell us, don't do that. Especially if you've had any level of success with something, they don't want you to go try too many different things. But I'm curious, what, because I've read a lot of the reviews for your work, and the reviews have generally been really, really good. And I was going to ask you a question about reviews later, but
yeah,
that tends to encourage us to
it does.
take
Yeah.
risks.
Yep.
Do you envision yourself doing more stories, maybe not necessarily with a supernatural bent, but that push those boundaries of the traditional thriller genre a little bit?
Definitely. I think that people at the end of the day, they want to be entertained. And the only reason we have genres is because traditional bookstores before the internet, I like thrillers. So I would go over and I would go look for in the thriller part of the bookstore. I don't want romance or mystery in that part of the bookstore because I'm looking for thrillers. So they broke it up to make it easy for the buyers of the readers to find. And once Amazon came along, it upset the apple cart hugely. And now there's no bookstore if you're buying online. So if somebody types in ghost, thriller, domestic or something, that's what they like. Those types of books should pop up because they're bending the genre, they're blending those genres together, and that's what the readers want. If you just want a thriller, go look for just thrillers. Fine, you can find whatever you want online. And I have no problem kind of being part of that evolution of storytelling as humans because it's at the end of the day, we want to be entertained. I
Right.
know I do. I don't necessarily prefer a book that's just one thing. If it's got some, especially movies or books, if they've I like it if it's exciting stuff, but there's a romantic element too. I mean, just for me, that's what I like. So I try to write what I like.
I think
Yeah,
readers are more complex than we often give them credit for. At least the
right,
industry gives them credit for.
right.
Along those lines, I asked you a little bit maybe of what you thought you'd learned in your time of doing this. Um, Maybe tell me what you think about the industry itself, because as I noted, it has changed a lot in the last, God, 20, 30 years for sure, but it feels like
Yeah,
sometimes like it changes every year.
yeah.
Maybe what's your perspective? Because, and I'll backtrack just a little bit. There was a time when, being an indie author was looked at, askance. Um, that's changed a lot, obviously, because as the industry has winnowed down in terms of the traditional publishers down to just the big five now,
Right.
a lot of the sub labels are gone and all that kind of thing. So now again, the options are greater than they've ever been, and a lot of them are considered on par with all but maybe the very top of the publishing industry. That's my perspective on it. What's your perspective on the industry, its evolution, and maybe where it stands in terms of for writers right now?
I think it's never been a better time to write a book. There, even though reading as a whole, as a percentage, has gone down. It's was, 60% of adults used to read. Now it's 20% or something like that. But people are buying and consuming more books. The readers who are still out there, they're consuming more books than ever. Yes, it's competitive. Yes, it's hard to write a book. Yes, it's hard to get out there and get known and stuff. It's a challenge, but it's a great time to put something out there because people want to hear stories. It's in our DNA to tell stories, and from stories we gain lessons. And when we're entertained by a story, it helps us stay calm. It helps us with our critical thinking, which I think a lot of people can use an improvement on. But it's a great time. So, traditionally you've had not traditionally, but before Amazon, you could either go traditional publishing or no publishing. That was it. And you've got your top tier New York Big Five. You have second tier, there's a whole bunch of them. And then you've got your kind of third tier or independent publishers. And everybody's kind of experimenting right now. And then when Amazon came around, now anybody can put a book out. You don't need to have a publisher. And so that kind of threw everything into a tailspin. The big five have been, for the most part, adapting and evolving, but they still move at a snail's pace.
Yeah,
And they have to because there's a lot of money on the line, and that's their business model. And they're changing. But when you have tens of billions of dollars in and out, it's going to take a while to change. And so they're adapting. They got, some good people there, and it's happening. But you also have these kind of second tier publishers that maybe have 30 or 40 or 50 authors, and they're able to have more flexibility, and they're there to get the books out and to entertain people in the best way possible. So they're the ones who can kind of take those traditions and throw them out and say, hey, if people want this, if you want three or four different genres blended into one book and it's going to sell well and it's going to entertain the readers, let's go for it. Let's take that chance. And then you have just the indie publishers who can do well, but in general, there's a bar, and I don't want to make anybody sound bad here, but just because you've written a book doesn't mean it's good. It takes a lot of time and a lot of energy to um, get put out a book that's as good as what the big five and even the second tier publishers are putting out. And the bar is very, very high. You look at a human being and you look at their writing process and you go, hey, this is a book. It's 350 pages. My book is 350 pages. It's probably about the same. There's so much there that's under the current that's happening in within the words that you can't see that makes a bestseller a bestseller. Um, and a lot of people just don't realize that I am guilty of that. My first book, I thought the bar was down here.
Yeah,
Again, how hard can it be? I wrote the book. I'm going to do my spell check and I'm done. No, that was like 5% of the work. The bar is very, very high to get in, to get a publishing deal with at least, one of the big five. And even that, you get an agent, get a deal with the big five, and that doesn't guarantee any type of success either.
right.
So the numbers are totally against you. If you're in this for the money, you're in the wrong industry. Writers are here to entertain, to have to almost as a hobby, if you will. It's something that's fun to do. We write because we enjoy writing and we enjoy giving something to our fellow man. But that's kind of how I see in general the overall publishing industry. It's in a state of change right now. The way it is right now is totally different than 5 years ago. My first book, I had an agent, but he couldn't get it sold. So he said, "Hey, go ahead and self-publish this." And I was like, "Okay." So I I put it out like a week later, no publicity. Publicity is 4 to 6 months before your pub date. I didn't know that. Fail.
Hmm.
Lesson learned. I put it out and then I started doing my marketing and it wasn't catching like it's supposed to. Well, because you're supposed to do publicity before you publish and then you do your marketing after you publish. Um, and then I kind of got blacklisted. I was trying to get an agent, and they're like, "Oh, you already put a book out? You self-published it? I don't even want to talk to you."
Right.
That's the way it was in 2018. 8 years ago, totally different. If you do that now, okay, that was fine. Good for you. What do you got now? It's okay. The agents are like, "What do you got now? You have a second book? Let's take a look and see if it stands on its own merits, regardless of how your first book did. Let's take a look at this one." You couldn't do that 8 years ago. And that's only 8 years. That's not that long. And so who knows where we'll be in another 5 or 10 years. It's changing every month.
Yeah, that's a really great point because I do think, me too, when I first got into this, I thought, oh, getting an agent, I'm done. I mean, I'm in. This is,
Yeah.
the road. And well, I'm on my third agent now. And
Yep.
I'm still, trying to find any modicum of
Yeah.
success in writing novels, right? So I've learned the hard way, all the same thing, learned the hard way. And it reminds me a lot. I have a friend who's a filmmaker and um, I helped on a shoot one time, and we kind of wrapped the filming sequence. And he turned to me and he said, "Now we start making the movie." It's like, really? Because you've been shooting for months. And he's like,
That's right.
"No, movies aren't made in shooting. Movies are made in editing."
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Didn't know it. Yeah.
There's a lesson learned, and I think it's the same thing with writing novel length stories. Everything is in the editing. Everything is in the review and you get a chance. You got to get everything out of your system. I don't know how many iterations the average published novel goes through, but good ones, you can tell they've gone through many to
Yeah.
clean up every, dead end and all that stuff. So
Yeah.
it's very different, I think, than what maybe some people think about what it takes to do this.
Right.
Sticking on the movie thing for just a second, though, because I know you also write screenplays.
Yeah.
I've read some really great thrillers lately from people who did a lot of work in television writing, and it really showed in their writing. Really fast paced, very visual. Didn't go too fast or become too visual, I guess, but really. Shorter chapters, very different from in fact, I tried a little bit of that uh, on my newest manuscript, and my agent said, "Hey, no, you need to make some of these chapters a little longer, okay?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Okay," but the short version is, I'm curious what the screenwriting muscle has meant for you overall, especially with your novels. Is
Yeah.
that how did is your thought process different? What does it take for you to move back and forth in those genres?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I attended a conference yeah, 8, 9 years ago in Washington called Books to Screen or Hollywood Books to Hollywood or something like that. It was up in Washington, Spokane. And they brought in people from Hollywood, and there was some really good seminars and things like that. And we need content. And if you're going to write a movie script, make sure you get this software, and this is what the difference is between writing a novel and writing a screenplay. And I learned a lot. And so I thought, hey, why don't I try that and see if it's still telling a story? And so I had an idea for a story. I had a female protagonist. She's a scientist and she invents something and it helps solve crime. I'll leave it at that. And instead of writing a whole novel, I thought maybe let's experiment. And so I got the software. And when you write a screenplay, you only get two of the three elements that you get when you write a novel. When you write a novel, you get dialogue, you get action, and you get thoughts, internal thoughts, depending on your POV. When you write a screenplay, you lose the internal thoughts. You only get dialogue and action. That's it. Every page is 1 minute of screen time. So if you have 90 page screenplay, that's about an hour and a half movie. And it's very formulaic. Why? Because that works. You're supposed to have a major, the mirror point at 50%. You're supposed to have your dark moment at 75%. It's three acts. There's all these different pieces. And so you know all that going in. So I was like, okay, here's generally what I'm thinking the story is going to be. So let me put an outline together similar to how I do the novel. Put these pieces together, and this is the character arc, and this is the plot arc, and these are the subplots. You do all that, and then it goes very, very fast because it doesn't take long to write 90 pages of screenplay because it's, double space, single space, double and single. It goes pretty fast, and before you know it, I was like, oh, I have a whole story here. And from that, I was able to pitch, and I learned a lot about that process. Pitching, getting an agent, pitching movie studios is completely different than the publishing industry. That particular story ended up, I had sent it to a couple of people, and they said, we really like the story and everything. We would like to read this as a book. So I did like a reverse screen adaptation and I turned that into a novel. Now that's book one of an 8-part series that I'm working on. And so I've taken that like to the next level. But that's if you're interested in story writing and you don't have um maybe the patience it takes to write an entire 300 or 400 page novel, maybe screenwriting is for you because you can still tell a story. But one thing I learned is every single word matters. It should in a novel anyway, but it's even more uh, microscopic to make sure that every word matters. Because you change one word, it can change the whole scene in a screenplay.
Absolutely.
Repeat.
Yeah. I ask everyone that comes on this show a variation of this question. I noted earlier you've got great reviews, and that's fabulous. But there's always one, that somebody says something negative or what have you. And so I'm always curious how you deal with a negative review.
Another great question. I used to be an umpire. I umpired for 10 seasons in Little League. And I get 10 people yelling at me, people yelling at me for 10 years. I don't take it personal. I'm just doing my job. And I feel like that's kind of part of you go to a base. I love yelling at umpires, like, yeah, you suck, whatever, that's a terrible call. That's part of baseball, it's part of the culture. Here, for whatever reason, people feel like if they don't like the book, they need to leave a negative reply. Or I've had some people like, I got to page 12 and I put it down. Okay, well, this is art. At the end of the day, this is art. I don't like all books I pick up, even bestsellers. I can't read some of them because I don't like how they're written, but some people do. So that's just my perspective. So as long as I take this from I adopt the attitude, it's nothing personal. They have their own issue of why they felt the need to put a negative review out there. We'll leave it at that. And then at the end of the day, um, it just didn't sync up or vibe with the type of writing that they enjoy reading. It's not my fault. The other 98% of them liked it. And I see that James Patterson and J.D. Barker and David Baldacci, they all have negative review. You can go on any book,
Yeah,
put a one, there's always people that have 1-star reviews in there. Any author has 1-star reviews, every single one of them.
yeah.
Um,
Well,
except maybe,
speaking of umpires, I, I'm I think it was Whitey Herzog is the one I remember him saying it anyway. He may not have been the first, but talking about baseball managers responding to the fans and saying, well, or maybe it was Casey Stengel actually that said this, if you manage to please the fans, it won't be long, you'll be sitting up there with them.
yeah,
And
right.
that's what I think about with authors too, you can't please everybody. And
Can't.
the things you're right. I mean, there are people who hate Hemingway and Mark Twain, and people who are 1,000 times better of a writer than I'm ever going to be. So, what are you going to do, man?
What are you going to do?
And
It's art. Remember that it's if you're an author and you're bummed about a review, just remember you've made a piece of art, and not everybody's going to like the art that you brought into the world.
right,
Simple as that. Ideally, it's more good than bad, but and if it's not, if it's more bad than good, then there's a lesson there. Like, hey, maybe you need to, take a class or two, or get a different editor, or try a
yeah,
different genre or something until you kind of find your stride. And that's why I said at the beginning, it's that stick-to-itiveness, it's the grit to take the
right,
punches as you're going through. Like if your goal is to just, write however many books or to entertain people, you're going to get better the more you write. And if you get a bunch of bad reviews, okay, maybe that wasn't maybe that's not your best look. Or look at recording artists, music. Def Leppard is one of my favorite bands. They have some amazing songs. How many tens of millions of records have they sold? But there's a couple songs you listen, you're like, that sucks. That's not a good song. It doesn't sync with me. Again, it's art.
right,
So
right. Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, if all your reviews are terrible, well, maybe you should rethink it. But if it's 1 out of 10, the hell with that, right? Just
totally fine. Yeah,
yeah, take it for what it is.
right.
So, along those lines, though, now when you write anything in any kind of a genre, the genres often come with some kind of a trope, or maybe multiple tropes, actually. In the thriller world, are there tropes that you avoid, or are there, or maybe conversely, where you feel like, well, I've got to have this in here so people identify it as a thriller? You know, uh, what's your going in approach to the genre itself? Are there rules you feel you need to follow at all when you are working on a new story?
That's a little tricky. There's hundreds of tropes. So I don't go in thinking, oh, I gotta check off these tropes and I gotta avoid these or whatever. In general, I try to have a ticking clock of some sort. So where a storm is coming, or there's a bomb, or something needs to happen before a deadline, something like that to create that sense of urgency. That helps the readers keep turning the pages. But other than that, for whatever reason, my voice, when I put a story together, the tropes are all in there, but they're not conscious. I don't consciously put them in there. I'll give you an example. I put a manuscript from, I think it was my second book. I put it into an online script evaluating system. And it said, these are all the tropes, these are all your themes and stuff. And I was like, oh, cool. I didn't even think about them when I was writing. They just kind of come out as part of who I am as an author. And again, my experience watching movies, reading books, writing books, and the experiences I have in life, it just comes out and it ends up syncing up. And you can check off a whole bunch of little tropes in there because those are just storytelling aids that people are already familiar with
Right.
consciously or
Well,
subconsciously.
I should have asked this actually after we were talking a little bit about screenplays, but I understand you do voice acting too. Tell me a little bit about that and how maybe if in any way does that uh, positively affect your writing?
Well, I mean, I don't know if I do any type of voice acting.
I mean, if you want to, I can be an older man, or we could be the golden pile if we need to. Mostly character acting. I did take classes and I've done a bunch of commercials and I've done cartoons, and that's super fun. Um, it's another tool that I have in the toolbox. I did take Groundlings improv for anybody who's having problems with dialogue and conflict or ideas for dialogue. Taking an improv class or two is a gut punch of a way to make that work, because for me, it turned on and activated a part of my brain that was just not there before. I would get to a scene and I would, okay, this character says this, and then what does the next character say? And I was very on the nose, very predictable. And now I put it in there, and I usually go with the second or third line of dialogue that pops into my head. There was an exercise in the beginner class where they say new line. So you're up on stage with your scene partner, and you've established, the who, what, why, and you're doing back and forth, and then you'll say your line, and then the teacher will say new line, and you just on the fly without thinking another line, and they'll do that like two, three, four times. So you're like in the scene and new line. Well, the branches aren't working. How I don't see how we're supposed to do this. New line. Well, the green something something blah, blah, is not work. New line. I'm telling you, if the guy's bald head with something this and that, then we'd be okay, or whatever. And then you just on the fly. And so I do that when I write my dialogue. And usually, like I said, second, third, fourth try, usually it's something that's nice and full of conflict, and it's tighter and it's better and it's not on the nose, and it's something that AI would have never thought of, and it's good stuff. So
That's awesome. Any tool that helps us process our words and thoughts, because really at the end of the day, when we talk about writing, what we're really talking about is storytelling. And
exactly.
I've been a reporter for a very long time. I've covered sports, I've covered business, the arts, now politics for quite a long time. And it's one of the things when I have interns, you're trying to tell them, it's like, well, look, we're
Yeah,
still storytelling. We're not doing fiction.
right.
I know what some people think we do, but that's not what we do.
Yeah.
But you're trying to engage a reader
Mhm.
who probably has a very limited attention span, given that it's 2026.
Right.
So, it's funny. I just went through this with one of my interns who's working on a really interesting story. Um, and she buried the lead in the middle of a very long story. And I had to say, okay, it's a really sensitive subject. And it's like, look, you've got something great here, but it's 12 paragraphs in.
Nobody's going to read it. Yep.
Yeah, you're going to lose them before they ever get there. So you have to engage that reader, and you
Yeah.
have to make them care about why they should read more of this. And it's every line. If you don't, because they all get to, you know, at the end of that one graphic that they don't like, they stop reading. So it really is something where you have to engage quickly and think about things like what you're talking about. That's really good
Yeah.
for a new writer, particularly to be thinking about.
Absolutely.
Um, Well, sorry, I've got myself lost there for just a second. Um, you mentioned you have a new book coming out, so I was going to ask you, what was up next. So tell me what you can about the new book.
The new book is going to be, it's book three in the Jake Bendel series. Publication date October 6th, 2026. We're working on the cover right now, interior edit and all that, interior design, all that stuff. It's being published through JTech Publishing, small press. Excited about that. I haven't had a book come out in 2.5 years. Because my agent had, like I said, four books, and we're waiting for my instructions to her. And this is basically my fault. It's like, we're gonna go big or we're gonna go home. I want a big five, publishing contract. And she's done that, and they just take a long time to get back to her. And I haven't received any no's, but it's just taking a long time. There's a lot of other, people out there, other authors. So we decided to take one of those four, go with the small press, get that out in October. And meanwhile, she has three more, and I'm working on three more books at the same time. Um, and I'm co-authoring a book that I can't talk about. That, if all goes well, that'll come out in 2027. I'm very excited about that. And um, yeah, and then I just one of the four books that she turned in is, like I said, it's psychological suspense, borderline horror. It's all set in Big Bear, California, and it's very domestic. And it's basically a lady, retired civil engineer after a long, successful career here in Southern California. She goes up to her cabin to write her first novel, and she wakes up in the middle of the night. She doesn't remember how she got there. And outside are red and blue lights flashing, police tape. There's a fire. The house is on fire. The cabin next door is on fire, and there's a big swastika painted on the garage door. And she looks down at her hands, and there's the swastika is red, white, and black. And she looks down at her fingers. She's got red, white, and black paint on her fingertips. She doesn't remember doing anything. Then she gets a knock on the door, and it's the sheriff. And they have apparently have video that they want to go over with her. And so there's a whole journey there, and I've got some really good twists. And if you kind of like the darker side, my mother-in-law read the first 8 pages and she put it down. She said it's too scary for her.
There you
Like,
go.
like thanks.
That's like mother-in-law approved, then.
Mother-in-law approved, like as a scary story. And I don't have any like violent stuff in there, but it's makes you think. And I did pitch this to a movie producer, and he said he loves the idea, loves the story. And so I sent a lookbook over to him, like a pitch deck, and he likes it. And so we'll see what happens with that. But that's a low budget film. That would be like an $8 to $10 million film, and apparently, according to him, horror is the biggest ROI right now, and you can make good money on that. So, and that's high demand. So I'm hoping my agent has better success with that book than we had, because I look at her as a
Yeah.
partner that
People
we
love to get the shit scared out of them, so I think your odds are good.
I think she's gonna get a quick sale on that one. But we'll see. I have no expectations. I'm just taking it day by day, and I enjoy the writing process. And um I like I said, creating something from nothing, it's a creative process, which is a little different than engineering, where everything's very regimented and stuff. So
Right.
yeah.
Well, I'd like to end with what I always intend to be a fun question. I hope it's a fun question. I'm going to give you an option here. I'm going to give you the option. Let's just say I'm the kind of person that can put you together with anybody from any time in history for whatever, drinks, dinner, conversation, whatever you want. Spend a little time with. I'm I'm going to give you three options. I want you to pick one and tell me why. Only one of
Okay.
the three. So the three options I'm going to give you are Mark Hamill, actor, June Foray, or Mel Blanc. Now, most people will recognize there's a through line on these, so we'll talk about after you've chosen one. But Mark Hamill, June Foray, or Mel Blanc, who would you choose and why?
All right. Well, it'll be Mark Hamill. He's a voiceover actor now too, and he was in Star Wars, which was one of the first movies I ever went to go see. I remember waiting in line for 2 or 3 hours as a 7-year-old to go see that, and just blown away by the whole Star Wars movie, and then all the movies that he made afterwards. I've seen interviews of him. He seems like a nice guy, and yeah, I would love to go hang out for dinner with him and talk about his voiceover acting career. And we could shit with swap stories, or we can do whatever we want to do. He's really good with he's at a whole nother level where you listen and you're like, that doesn't sound anything like Luke Skywalker. He can
Right.
change his voice so much. He's so skilled and talented. And he just seems like a nice guy. So that would be who I would pick.
Awesome. Well, and if anyone missed it, of course, Mel Blanc was a great Looney Tunes that got over 1,000 cartoons, and June Foray too. She was considered the female Mel Blanc.
Mel
So
Blanc, yeah.
all the voice acting was the through line there. So
Yes,
anyway,
very good.
well, hey, Luke, really appreciate it. Love having you come on the show. This has been really
Thank you.
insightful. I hope anyone out
Thank
there
you so
that's
much.
thinking about writing learned some stuff here today. I did, which is why I do this show, because God knows I ain't making any money at it either. I don't do this for money,
That's right.
folks. I do this because
That's
I
right.
love talking to writers.
Yep.
And
Good.
if anything that we talk about here helps you, or someone that you know and care about, who's looking to get into this crazy, insane hobby slash lifestyle
Yeah.
pursuit,
Yep.
I hope something, we said here today is helpful. So, I will remind everybody once again, if you haven't done so, please, please hit the subscribe button. If you'd be so kind as to leave a review, that'd be great. Tell a friend, that would be great too. And, hey, Luke, thank you so much for coming on the open mic, Writers in Their Own Words.
Hope we helped somebody out there, and we'll see you guys at the writers' conferences.
Absolutely. And I will end with the same thing I always end with, which is, tomorrow is not promised to any of us. So please, whatever you do, make today count. Till then, I am Rich Eisen. For my guest, Luke Bennecke, this has been The Open Mic.